We hope you enjoy this message from Pastor Ben Miller. Don't forget to follow our page, subscribe to our channel, and share this video.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, it's good to be back, and like she said, for the first time without Rachel, I have to preach by myself, and so it's kind of a big deal today, you know. What's interesting is that during this crazy, I promise I'll keep it on my chin, and then you can adjust it. We're trying to get this thing right, but come to find out it's my issue because I keep moving the mic around. Do you guys ever do that? You ever seen someone at a bar mitzvah? If you go to bar mitzvah and they hold it down here at their belly, first of all, you need to go to bar mitzvah. Like, that's your first issue. Second issue is you need to hold the mic correctly. So are you good with that, Corey? Good man. What's interesting during this time is that I've pretty much gotten so frustrated with a few things that I've decided that I'm just going to change my name. After all of this, every time I go to Starbucks, they ask me my name for the order. And of course, my name is Ben. If you don't know me, hi, my name is Ben with a B. And every time I get my drink back, for some reason, it's Glenn. Yeah, they say, could you say that again? It's Ben. And they say, is it Glenn? Yeah, it is. It's Glenn. And then I get my drink back, and my new name is Glenn. And so I've decided, just in honor of COVID, I'm going to go ahead and switch my name for a few years to Glenn. I'm sure I can I can't surprise anyone anymore at this point. And I just want to change my name and be Glenn. Do you know what's interesting about Glenn? We do have one here. He's not here right now. But Glenn actually means genuine and loyal. Did you know that? And if you know Glenn, he's actually here. He's not on parking today, but he was here first service. And his name is Genuine and Loyal, and it's a Celtic name, which but it was really popular in the 1800s. And then it died out really hard in 2012 for some reason. I don't know what happened in 2012, but Glenn died out hard, and so they expect me to be Glenn. So anyway, just in case you want to know, my new name for the COVID season is Glenn, and that's what you can refer to me as from now on. And I will respond to that to the best of my ability. That's what I will do. It's good to be back, and it's good to be with you. And it is such a wonderful and hot day, isn't it? We're trying to get the air conditioning set, and we have all these new toys we're trying to figure out. But anyway, bear with us this morning, and it's good to be with you. I have a question for you. Have you ever lost something? And I don't mean like it got stolen or you misplaced it, you know what I mean? Or it's like, hey, I'm talking where something fell apart. You ever been a part of something, whether maybe it was like a project that you were on, and all of a sudden it just completely fell apart, and you're sitting there going, it's gone. Like, the wheels are off. We're still moving forward in motion, but the wheels are completely off of this thing. Everything is falling apart. I mean, like things like investments. Maybe you've been a part of something where you invested in it, and all of a sudden, everything just completely fell apart, and you realized this isn't working anymore. Maybe you had a relationship where you were really good friends with somebody, and then there just came a moment, like a decision or a change in the relationship, where you realized, hey, this is just absolutely falling apart, whether it was your doing or not your doing. Have you ever been a part of something that completely disintegrated while you were trying to fix it? Anyone? I know I have. And whether it was a job or a house, maybe you bought a house and it was a complete bad investment, and you just had to literally stop and say, I'm done. Like, it's over. It's finished. There's nothing else I can do to keep this. It's just completely falling apart. Now, I get it. Sometimes what we do is we reevaluate, we re-strategize, we restructure, and especially as men on Father's Day, don't we just try and fix it? I mean, we'll do anything we can, but there comes a point where probably your wife looks over to you and says, just let it go. Please stop pilanding this thing. Just let it go. Please stop. Yes, Josh. Please stop pilanding this thing and let it go. There's one thing for sure right now that's happening in our nation, and it's also probably happening in your life. But there is a great shaking that is going on right now. Isn't it true? I mean, when you look now, the hopes is that it's not actually affecting our lives. But we do see everywhere we look, there's this great shaking that's happening. Stuff is being shaken apart. And there are some things in our world, in our nation, in our state, or maybe even in your life that are absolutely falling apart during this time. It's good for us to step back and reevaluate a few things based off our foundation. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said this, and I love his words. I'm going to read it out of the New Living Bible. It'll be up there on your screen. And Jesus said this, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in the torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it was built on bedrock. He goes on to say this, but anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey is foolish, like the person who builds on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against the house, it will collapse. And it will collapse, say it with me, with a mighty, mighty crash. This is what Jesus said, is that there are two ways in which we can build our life. And he's not just talking about building a real house. Now, obviously, if you're going to build a real house, we build it on rock called concrete, which is really, really good. But you don't want to build it on sand and watch it disintegrate. There's no reason you want to put hundreds of thousands of dollars in the air just to chance it and see if it's going to come down in the next big storm. We know that physically, but isn't it interesting when we look at our life, what he's making a metaphor here because he's just gone through the Sermon on the Mount and gone through all of these different topics, and he's trying to remind people, this is just before he finishes out, these are the last word he says on the Sermon on the Mount. It is your choice whether you're going to build on a rock as a foundation, which is his word, or whether you're going to build on sand, which is your own choice. The question I have for you today is, how is your house doing? Through all the shaking that's going on in these last 12 to 15 weeks, how is your 401k? How is your job? How is your relationships? How is your health? How's your mind? I can tell you that as I look through this list and start to go, how are my relationships? How are all the things in my life? I can tell you that even me, there are things that are shaking in and around me. And I'm asking that question, oh God, please don't let it all fall apart. And maybe it's just mentally. Maybe you're so stressed out of everything that's happening. You're just sitting there going, help me not fall apart. Help me hold on. Help my relationship. Help my mind. Help my physical health through all of this. How is your joy? Here at this house, we say choose joy. But we know that there are seasons in your life where joy comes easy. And then there are seasons in your life where it's usually my wife going, Ben, choose joy. And I'm thinking, don't talk to me. I don't want to hear it. Don't say it. Because there are days in which the choice of joy is actually something that you're never going to get from your circumstance. You're never going to get it in a circumstance. You're going to have to go deep within and say, okay, this is not fun. Yes, I'm going to figure out how to choose joy. How in the world do I build right? How do I build on a rock as a foundation as opposed to building on the sand? Wisdom says this, before we move on, that the timing of this message for me is so purposeful. Because we've just gone through a big shaking, but now we're at a place in our country and in our lives where we're thinking about rebuilding. My encouragement to you is to take some time to just look at the foundation of your life before you get another $100,000 up in the air on the foundation that just fell apart. Please, by all means, stop for a second and reevaluate. Do a little inspection. Before you buy a house, what do? You pay someone. You literally pay someone hundreds of dollars to walk in and inspect the house for you. Why? Because you don't want to invest all of that money in something that you're only going to find out that the drain pan is unhooked underneath it, or the front deck porch is absolutely broken off, or there's mold in the attic. You want to inspect the house and make sure that all things are well. What I want to do today is I just want to take a little bit of time and I want to just do a foundation check. It's so important that we stop and we ask ourselves the question, am I actually building my life in the Christian worldview that I say that I believe? You know, so many times you can say you believe something, but when you start to build, it's when we actually see if you believe it. You know, it's one of those things where someone asks, well, do you believe this? Well, yeah, of course I believe this. But then you walk away and you realize, I don't know if I totally believe this. There are two, what I would consider opposing worldviews that we've chose to build our life on in our country and in our community. I'm not just going to pick on our country today, but I do want to say this, that I've noticed we can see very clear belief system between what we consider a Christian worldview and a secular worldview. And as we go through this today, I think that you'll be able to step back and actually have a clearer perspective. I find so many people call themselves Christians but still live with a secular worldview. They do. They say, well, I'm a Christian, I believe in God, but here's what I believe. I believe this, this, and this. But when we define that, that's actually not even God's Christian worldview. That's why I love this. Jesus is speaking to people who are following Jesus. And he's saying, you have a choice to make. You can choose to build on the rock, which he said is my word, or you can choose to build on the sand. And there are two completely opposing views in our country. And to be honest, we have tried them both. One of them is not working and is failing us. And one of them has never, ever failed us. I just want to take a few minutes. And maybe for you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For others, you're thinking to yourself, please define for me a Christian worldview. And I'll tell you if I believe that. What's great about this is that I'm not going to tell you what to believe. You get to make up your own choice on what to believe. I get to make my choice on what I believe. In fact, my wife gets to make up her own choice on what she believes. But what I'm choosing to do and what I want to define for you today is a very clear picture of what it looks like to not just say I'm a Christian, but to actually have a Christian worldview and to be able to know exactly what the secular worldview that most of our country is operating on in the moment. And to ask ourselves the question, and this is what we're going to do as soon as we define it, we're going to have a spaghetti test. Does everybody know what the spaghetti test is? The spaghetti test is you take a piece of spaghetti and you throw it at it. Throw it at the wall, and if it sticks to the wall, that means the spaghetti's done. That's what we're going to do. We're just going to grab a few concepts at the end. We're going to throw them at both worldviews, and we're going to ask ourselves the question, which ones work and which ones don't? Once again, I'm not here today to try and offend you, but what I would like to encourage you to do is to double check your own foundation and ask yourself the question, which one have I been saying I believe, and which one have I actually been living? Very practical, and I felt really, really needed. Titus and I were, this week, Titus and Zion and I, we left Sunday after church last week, and we drove down to Yosemite National Park, which was absolutely beautiful, and we hiked around. We were there with Bayside Adventure Sports, and we got to see all the waterfalls, and we got to hike and fish and bike, and had an incredible time. And we spent 1,275 miles in the car with a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old. It was just so amazing. And the conversation was just enthralling. And I can say by the time I hit Lakeview, it was hilarious. Titus and I are sitting there talking, and we were discussing a few things. And what's interesting about kids, especially at that age, they have so many questions because they really want to know. They want to know how it works practically. And I said, okay, well, here's what I'm going to teach you. Let me give you a Christian worldview, and let me explain to you why we choose to live this. And then you can tell me which one works and which one doesn't. And literally in the car, we just went through Christian worldview versus secular worldview. We laid out both ideas. And I said, which one do you think works? And he's like, well, isn't it obvious? Yes, it is obvious to us. But what if you believe this? And we started doing the spaghetti test. And what was so amazing is he just stops in the middle of it, a 12-year-old boy, and he goes, now that makes sense. I never saw it like that, Dad. He said, thank you for explaining that to me. And then, of course, it's very quickly, I got to go to the bathroom, give you something to drink, and fight with your brother. But all that to say, it was just this really beautiful moment. And I just stepped back, and I was asking God, what do you think? And I just felt like the Lord said, I really think it would be good for you to clearly define what a Christian worldview is so that we know how to live. Because I can tell you to build on a rock, but if I don't tell you what the rock is, if I don't tell you how to find it, then what am I doing? If we're not actually defining for ourselves what we believe and how to believe it. And once again, you get to make your choice going out of here. You can toss it up in the air and walk away. Or you can choose to say, I'm not only going to be a Christian, but I'm going to choose to live a Christian worldview. Let's walk through both of them. First one is this, so you're with me. Everybody with me. The Christian worldview, and once again, I don't want to demoralize one. I just want to clarify both. Obviously, you can probably guess which one I believe just based off the fact of maybe even where I'm standing, okay? And maybe because I put together the content. So the reality is that our Christian worldview is defined very clearly in one chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. The only thing I'm pulling this out of is Genesis chapter 1. If later you want to go do some more research, Acts chapter 17, when Paul is in Athens, he actually walks around and he says, I see that you have all these idols. And he says, you even have an idol to an unknown God. Now let me explain to you what this unknown God is. And he actually defines, based off of Genesis 1, a Christian worldview, and he reinstates it, which is really, really beautiful how he does it so eloquently. But a Christian worldview as taken out of Genesis chapter 1 is this. In the beginning, if you know the book, in the beginning, God. Like that's the start. That's literally the start of the entire thing right there. In the beginning, we believe God created all things. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. And what's interesting is this, is that secular worldview, also known as the Big Bang Theory, not just the Bang Theory, it's a Big Bang Theory. Okay? It's a really Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory and Christian worldview and secular worldview actually agree almost on this point. In the beginning, 4 things had to exist and coincide together. They all had to happen at the exact same moment. We had to create time, space, matter, and then there had to be energy to power everything. Those are the 4 things that have to be created. If you read through what is the Big Bang Theory, they're going to tell you it's the moment there was a big a big universal accident bang, and at that big bang, several things were created. Because it was a bang, that was the energy, so the bang is the energy, and it was a big one. It's a big energy, okay? A big one. I hope you get that. And we know this, Genesis 1, in the beginning is time. God created the heavens, which is space, and he created the earth, which is matter. We actually agree on the same point. In verse 3 it says, and then God said. That's energy. And we know that actually out of your vocal cords you create energy. That if you speak over water, you actually create a ripple effect through the water. And we believe that in the beginning, God created time, space, matter, and energy out of his heart, out of his belly, and out of his mouth. And out of love for what he was creating, God created. What's interesting between the Big Bang Theory, the universal accident, and God created it, we all believe that 4 things had to start at the same time. The only difference is one of them was an accident and one of them was on purpose. This is the big difference. And so when I'm talking to someone who believes evolution or believes the Big Bang Theory, I says, I agree with you. The only difference is I just believe it was on purpose and you believe it was an accident. That's the only definition. That's the only change. But what's interesting is that one thing, in the beginning, God, that one thing actually starts now a worldview that I can build upon. Where when you believe everything started with a universal accident, it's really hard to put everything back together after that. And so we know this, that in the beginning, we know God. Why do we know? By faith. The exact same faith it takes for a bang. Do you see that? The exact same faith in a bang is the exact same faith in God. It takes the same amount of faith to believe it was an accident or to believe it was on purpose. Because you both believe all of a sudden nothing became something. It's interesting in the book of Genesis, there's 2 different words for created. One of them is bara and the other one is asa. I've talked about this before. Bara means to take something and create from nothing, which means literally nothing. No matter, no space, no time, just to create from nothing. And then there's another word called asa, is to take something and to form it into something. We asa create all the time. We take things, whether it's a pile of sticks and build a house, or whether it's a leather and we sew it together, whatever it is, we are built in the image of a creator God, and we can create and form just like he can. But one thing he can do that we can't is bara. He can take something that is not and make it something. This word, in the beginning, God created. That's nothing. He took absolutely nothing and he banged it together real good. And he created time, space, matter, and energy. And it's important for us as a Christian worldview. Why when people say, well, it doesn't really matter who created it, just that it happened. No, it matters. And you're going to see, because of my Christian worldview, it actually really, really matters that it was on purpose, not on accident. Because all of a sudden, here's number 2, is that a Christian worldview believes that I was created with and for purpose. And a secular view believes that you just evolved by chance. There are 2 different and distinct things. The first one is you're an accident that's here by chance. And the second one is you're created by God with purpose and for purpose. And what's interesting is, as we see defined in God's word, not just individual purpose. There's actually a corporate purpose, and we're better together. There's a corporate connection together where God actually sets the purpose. And he even says, I love this, let us, which is the Trinity, create man in our own image. Let us do this. Let him look like us and act like us, and let him have characteristics of who we are. There was purpose behind you being here, alive. Every single person has purpose. There isn't some who live purpose and have it and some who don't. In the beginning, God created every single one of you. He started this whole thing in motion because he has a purpose. He has a purpose globally, he has a purpose corporately, and he has a purpose individually. But the issue is this, is that the secular view believes that this was all to start an accident, and we are now here by chance. Now, both worldviews have what they call a secret sauce. I'm going to tell you the secret sauce just because you need to know the secret sauce. The secular worldview's secret sauce is time. If you can just give it enough time, it can do anything. And so you read it, well, how in the world did we get from a bacteria all the way to a lizard, all the way up on land to Neanderthal man to man? Well, I can tell you the secret sauce was time. Well, it was 30 billion years. Well, I don't know if it could actually happen in that. Okay, well, make it 30 trillion. Just add a little more time. Because time is the answer to everything. Time is how everything can evolve. And how in the world did you get all these rock formations? And how in the world does this look so old and this act so old, but this looks so young? Well, time. If you just have time, the secret sauce of the secular worldview is time. And you see it every time you see a plaque, every time you read a science book nowadays, every time you see something, they start with the secret sauce. And it always, sentences start with 30 billion, trillion, just a ton of zeros. Or, whether it's a 3, a 5, or an 8, or whatever it is, then there's a whole bunch of zeros behind it. That's the secret sauce. And now we can talk about how it all came together. I was reading some stuff on the Big Bang, and it was so interesting to me to see how confident it was. We now know beyond the shadow of a doubt that this formed from a black hole. I'm thinking to myself, what? How do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt? It still requires faith. It still requires faith for you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And the reality is that if I just throw a little time in it, it'll fix everything. Now, our secret sauce is God. That's the one factor that makes it all work. That's the one thing that all of a sudden puts everything together. So how is it all fixed? How is it all formed? How is it all put together? Our secret sauce? God. And so our secret sauce is God. That's why it's so important that we believe that he created it, because he's the secret sauce that makes it all work, that puts it all together. But the secret sauce, if you don't have somebody who created it on purpose, you got to have secret sauce. And the secret sauce is time. The third part of the Christian worldview says this, that I was created with and for order. And what we find in Genesis chapter 1 is that God lays out an order. As soon as he has created time, space, matter, energy, he starts to actually now form it. And it says he forms the earth and he forms the elements. He starts putting all this stuff together. And as soon as he's created the space, he fills the space. And he starts by, doing fish, and then he has land animals and plants and all this stuff. So he creates the space. He fills the space. It's the exact same thing that happened when I bought a van. I bought a van, and I created a space, and my wife filled that space. Then she says, can we get a bigger van? And I said, no, not until I get fixed, because you will fill whatever I give you. So I got fixed, and then we bought a bigger van. I'm smart, but I do know the natural order of things. God created it, he filled it, and then what did he do is he put order to it. And he governed it, and he says, I'm going to put the sun here and the moon here to govern this. You can see a map of stars in the sky. I'm going to create this like this, and this will be over this. And then he actually even puts man in the garden. And he does the exact same thing because we're called to govern the earth. We're the last portion of that governing. And he actually talks to husband and wife, man or Adam and Eve, and he says the exact same thing. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. We're actually called to do what Jesus did, what God did with the creation. Create it, fill it, govern it. That's what we're called to do with this earth. That's what we're called to do with our lives. In your homes, create a home, fill the home, and then govern the home correctly. In fact, that's what we're called to do, whether it's in government or whether it's in schools or whether it's in your own home life. There is an order and a structure that is placed in motion for us to continue to follow. And it works really well. Because if you start trying to fill stuff before you've created it, you now have a mess. And if you start trying to govern it before you actually have a place for it to be governed, it's also a mess. So we make and create just like him, but not bara, we asa. We fill, and then we go on and move from there, and we govern. It's the order in which God's created. One thing that's interesting is that by definition, just explaining it to my son, he said, well, what's the difference between the secular worldview and the Christian worldview on it? And I said, well, it's the difference between what we call microevolution and macroevolution. So we believe in a secular worldview or in an evolution society, we both agree on what we call microevolution. Microevolution is the adaptation of change over time. It means little changes within kind. So, for instance, birds, and if you've read anything or if you were awake for any of your high school science classes, you're going to find that there was, like, bird beaks got stronger because of the nuts that they were eating, and animals changed color, which probably also meant flavor. And so there's all these kind of little changes and adaptations within the kind. In fact, when you get sick, your body creates an antibody in order to fight that. So as soon as you get sick once, as soon as you have chickenpox once, they say you can't. It's really hard to get it again. Why? Because your body has adapted. It's microevolution, has adapted to actually now fight that so that you can live and breathe and move and not die. This is microevolution. It's stuff that we believe in. It actually happened. In fact, let me tell you this. When I was young, I was at the dentist office. Now, I do go to the dentist now too, but I went to the dentist office and they took the x-rays, and he came back to me and he says, hey, I have good news for you. And I said, well, thank you. What is it? And he says, you were born without wisdom teeth. Titus says it's because I have no wisdom. I said it's because I don't have to take my wisdom out and throw it away. I said, really? And he looked at me and he says, yes, you are on the next scale of the evolutionary chain. Our bodies have realized we don't need them, and therefore what we're doing is there's people who are now being born without wisdom teeth, and over time, more and more people just will be born without wisdom teeth because we'll adapt and change. That's microevolution. And my wife knows that I'm on the next scale of the evolutionary chain. So just to let everybody know, I'm like 2.0. And I don't have wisdom teeth. Those are micro changes in DNA structure, in bacterial structure, chemical structure, and stuff like this. We can see and we can agree that there are changes and adaptations within kinds. But the difference is that secular worldview, the only way for it to work is if you can go from kind to kind. There's what they call natural order selection. I'm sure you've heard this before, is that natural order is basically survival of the fittest, which means if you want to live, you got to fight to survive. If you want to be here, you got to adapt and change, or you're done. You're obsolete and you're no more. I can't tell you how many times I've seen natural selection in our voting process. The idea of change and adapt or move aside. Either you're going to change what you believe about something, and we're going to move forward as an society because we are progressive. Natural order and natural selection. Microevolution is something we agree on. Macroevolution is something we don't. For instance, macroevolution. If you take macroevolution, you add a whole bunch of time to it and you shake it together, what you get is you get bacteria that moves to a fish, that now all of a sudden forms and adapts and changes to a lizard, which moves to a platypus, goes to a monkey, then it adapts to a gorilla, then it goes to a Neanderthal man, which is our missing link, which we can't find, and then goes to what we call modern man. Welcome, everybody, to modern man. This is what you get to experience today. Macroevolution is the variation and adaptation from kind to kind. It's really important that you read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, where it says, and God created each as their kind. Change and adaptation within kind is good. But one thing we don't see evidence of, one thing that we cannot have unless we have a whole bunch of time, which still doesn't work, is the adaptation from kind to kind. I've never, and nobody has ever seen a bacteria form into a platypus. Over time. The secret sauce. And to be honest, we still haven't found the missing link. We've found some people who look like the missing link. But we have not found the missing link. God created with order and with structure and by kind. Kind is very, very important that you know that, because there still is no evidence of macroevolution. No matter how hard you look, you're never going to find it. But what we teach in a secular worldview is that we are a universal accident. We're here by chance. And if you want to survive, you're going to have to fight. You're going to have to fight to survive. However you do it, you're going to have to make sure that you're at the top of the food chain. And the last part of the Christian worldview and the secular worldview is this, is that we believe that the Creator, God at the beginning, who created everything, is the ultimate authority. Which means we play by his rule book. He defines what's right and wrong. He defines the rules in which we play by, and he defines what is moral, not us. We don't get to choose what is moral. We don't get to choose what is right and wrong. The Creator, who created you and everything with purpose, who set everything in order, is the one who set in motion things like gravity. As much as you want to tell us that gravity does not exist, it exists. And you can't get around it. Jump off a 10-story building. You will find out very soon, no matter how much you want gravity to not work, no matter how much you don't believe in it. That is a rule and a law and an order set in motion by your Creator, gravity. And it helps you keep on the earth, because otherwise you would float away. And to be honest, there are some people whose minds have just floated off because they don't understand this. We believe 100% that we are stewards, which means we have to answer to God for what we do, for what we say, for how we vote, for what we believe, for what we teach our kids. We are actually under an authority. And so when my kids come to me and they say, Dad, what about this? I actually don't say, well, let me decide what I think should happen. I say, that's a good question. Let's go and see what God says. I'm not called to raise my kids by my morals. I'm called to raise them by his. I'm not called to tell my kids right and wrong by my definition. I'm called to give them the right and wrong, as is the Creator of the universe, who built you, created you, and sustained you. It's his purpose, his order, and his authority. The issue is this: when you believe that you're an accident, that you're here by chance fighting for survival, the reality is the ultimate end line for all of this is that you, yourself, is the ultimate authority, which means this: you get to choose right and wrong. You get to choose what is bad and what is good. You get to choose everything in your life, and you get to make up your mind on what is moral. Everything constantly changing. And what's interesting is that in our country, all of a sudden it'll come up and they'll say, well, let's vote on what is moral. Let's vote on whether we should do this or that. And the reality is that we have this ever-changing secular worldview concept that is constantly changing. And what somebody believes about something in this moment changes. And you go, why in the world did you just change what you believed? How is it that you can tell me that 25 people meeting to worship God is bad and then 10,000 people on a bridge a few miles away is good? How is it that you can justify that? You know how? Because their landscape is constantly changing. And they get to choose what is right and wrong whenever right and wrong appears to itself. They get to make up their mind. And there is a belief in our society and in our government, and it really frustrates me when they think if they were elected in, they're the ones who get to choose right and wrong. They're the ones that are elected to represent right and wrong. Because they have usurped themselves as stewards, and they've put themselves into the place of an owner. They think that they are now God. The way our country was built, now granted, I'm not going to preach our country. I believe God's word. That's kind of like my foundation. And there's a lot of countries that come and go, and a lot of policies and procedures and all this stuff that happens. But when somebody is taught for 100 years a secular worldview that you're an accident, you evolved by chance, it's fittest of the survival, and if you can make it to the top of the pile, you get to choose right and wrong for us. That is a concept that has destroyed our nation. It has destroyed our schools, it has destroyed our kids, and it is quite frankly something that I step back and go, I don't know. It doesn't seem to add up to me, because one of these is a worldview created by God and set by God, and the other one is created by man for man. And the moment you get into the game and I change the rules, you can never win. So the goal is natural selection, to just be at the top of the pile so you can always create the rules. When the reality is there should be a set of rules that we all get to play by together to make it fair. That was the hopes in the creation of our country in the beginning. But once again, countries rise and fall. But God's word stays the same. From the very beginning of creation, we can see in Genesis chapter 1 a Christian worldview. The question is this: are you going to choose to live it, Or are you going to choose to live a secular worldview? You might be here today and go, well, I also believe that if you take one from this side and one from that side, they don't work together. You get to choose one or the other. Either God's in charge or you are. Either God sets the ground rules or you do. Either God is the one who defines purpose or you get to define purpose. Either God defines right and wrong or you define right and wrong. And if you get to define right and wrong, the reality is whoever you place in government is going to define it for you. Because whoever has the most power in natural selection is the one who gets to rule the roost. And this is the difference between the two, Christian worldview and a secular worldview. These are things that we have. We've done a 100-year experiment in our country on secular worldview. I have to ask the question, is it working for us? 1859 is when Darwin wrote his book on the secular worldview of Darwinism, and we decided to take it, love it, eat it, teach it to our kids, enforce it in every single area, to force people to believe it. If you don't believe it, you're wrong. If you don't adapt and change, you're outdated. When the reality is we as Christians choose to live God's word, which is what we call a rock, which Jesus says, if you listen to my word and you build on this rock a Christian worldview and perspective, you will be able to weather all the storms, all this junk that blows at you. You'll be able to weather. Do you know what I see in our country right now? I see a giant mess of materials that have all fallen apart. And all they know how to do is create more chaos. You have to be able to fix the problem at a foundational level, not at an idea level. A new idea isn't going to help. My concern is that we as a country have just gone through a great shaking. Everything fell apart. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend all of our next 20, 30 years of my lifetime rebuilding on a foundation that never worked in the first place. So why don't we as Christians choose to actually live God's word, to actually create a foundation that works for us? So we do the spaghetti test, if you're with me on the spaghetti test, yeah? I love the spaghetti test. The question is this, and I'm going to throw a few things at it, and I'm going to ask the question. If you leave that slide up there, then we can kind of walk through it. Number one, even Kung Fu Panda asks the question, what is the meaning of life? Now, if you are a part of a secular worldview, the reality is there is no meaning to life. The meaning of life is you're an accident by chance and natural selection. So your meaning is all defined on if you can succeed, if you can overpower, if you can overdominate, and if you can, natural selection, make it to the top so that your ideas, your right and wrong wins. That's the meaning of life. Most people that we are raising in this society, although they don't say it, although they can't define it, that's their meaning of life, is just to make it to the top so that I can set the rules. In a Christian worldview, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is defined by God. And guess where I go to get it? I go to God. In a secular worldview, where do you get the meaning of life? Self. And in a Christian worldview, we go to God. So when somebody says, what is my purpose? Why was I created? When my son comes to me and says, God, what am I supposed to do with my life? It's not me saying, well, let's come up with a great idea. You need to look inside yourself. What do you see? I see Ninjagos, Lego Ninjagos. Okay, we're going to have to go deeper. God defines your purpose. And it's purpose by design. I'm going to ask you a question. Does time heal all things? God heals all things. In a secular worldview, time is the secret sauce that heals all things. But in a Christian perspective, the reality is no matter how much time you give it, it'll never fix it. Only Jesus Christ dying on the cross for your life and actually paying your penalty for sin is the way that it's going to work for you. There's no amount of time that's going to heal your brokenness, that's going to heal your body, that's going to heal you. It is only by Jesus, our special sauce, God. That is how it all works and is put together. What's interesting is that there's this, I love the ideas that purpose by design. And we can see that something is designed. For instance, these are sunglasses. And these are designed to protect my eyes when I go outside and it's sunny outside. So I put them on my face, and they're actually designed to stay on my face. And they protect my eyes from the sun. That was the design of this. Now, if this thing looked at me and said, listen, I'm an accident here by chance, and the reality is I want to make sure I have the best life that I possibly can, I would like to be a hammer. Or a toothpick. I'm going to look at that and I'm going to say, well, you weren't really designed to be a hammer, but I want to be a hammer. That's what I want. That's what I exist for. That's what I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose for myself right and wrong. I'm going to choose for myself what I want. So this thing says, I want to be a hammer. Perfect. Here we go. Didn't work. It would probably be a pretty good one, I guess. This isn't a hammer. Even if it wants to be, it's not. And then all of a sudden, by design, this is what we call a hammer. This is one of my favorites. My wife got it for me. It says, I love building memories with you. I know. It's great. Whenever a manly guy comes up to me and says, do you have a hammer? I usually give him this thing just to humiliate him. Exactly. It's because I love building memories with you. And this hammer says to itself, you know what I really think? I think that because I'm choosing for myself, I really want to be a pair of sunglasses. And you go, okay, that's great. You can be whatever you want. My little girl, you can be whatever you want when you grow up. Right? And so what happens is you grab this and you think, okay, so it has to sit on the face? And it's going to protect me from how is it supposed to? And it says, you don't understand. My dad told me I get to choose. I get to be whatever I want. And I want to be a pair of sunglasses. So I'm going to try and figure out how in the world, based off my design, I can actually make that thing happen. And it never actually works. Why? Because this wasn't designed to be a pair of sunglasses. There are some things that you were designed for. And there are some things that you were never designed for, but people think that they can all of a sudden become. I asked my son Titus, I said, if this pair of sunglasses told me that it was a hammer, would you believe it? And he said, no, it's obviously sunglasses. I says, okay, well, let's read a scripture. So God created human beings in his own image. In his image, he created them. And the word there is bara, from nothing. Male and female, he created them. Based off design, male and female, he created them. I says, what if this sunglasses tells me that I'm a hammer? Would you believe it? He says, absolutely not. I says, but what if I tell you have to believe it? He says, well, it still doesn't make sense. Based off the design, it's definitely not a hammer. I says, okay, so there are some things in our worldviews that only actually exist if we can agree to disagree. Because I can sit here and you can try and convince me all day long that this is a hammer, but just based off of what I would consider right and wrong, this is definitely not a hammer. But yet we have people who believe that they're an accident by chance fighting for survival. And the reality is that when you fight for survival, you get to choose whatever you are. You want to be a toaster? You can be a toaster. You want to be a computer? You can be a computer. When the reality is that it's like this big social experiment that we've been in. If we just let people choose what they want to be, it'll all work out. It doesn't all work out. Because the people who think that they're a computer trying to explain it to you, we look at them and go, I don't think you're a computer. Now, here's the thing. My wife and I have been happily married for most of 15 years. And the reality is, I don't agree with her all the time. I don't. We actually sometimes have to agree to disagree. We do. There sometimes comes things where she says, no, it's like this. I say, no, it's not. It's like this. No, it's like this. It's like this. Did you know instead of me natural selecting her and creating this male dominance chauvinist idea to say, well, you're just going to obey me because I'm your husband, right? I can actually stop and say, okay, we're going to agree to disagree, which means you can have your idea and I can have my idea. And guess what? You can still live in peace in my home. Did you know that in your country, you can disagree with people? And it should be okay. It should be okay for somebody else to believe something else and live their life. Because I'm hoping that they allow me to believe what I believe and live my life. And then wisdom is just proven by her children, the Bible says. So we just wait 1 or 2 generations to see, did it actually work? In 1959, when we opened up the book by Darwin and we started teaching it and living it and eating it and giving it to all of our kids, the question is now, over 100 years later, is it working? Telling our kids that you're an accident by chance. You got to fight for survival. You want to make change, you got to riot. You want to make change, you got to make a stink. You want to make change, you got to get to the top of the pile. And when you're at the top of the pile, you know what you can do? You can make the rules. You can make the rules, you can set morality, you can do whatever you want because you're going to be in charge. Is it working for us? To be honest, it's not working for me. But yet you and I, even if we believe a Christian worldview, are so surrounded by a secular worldview. You need to understand this, is that it is okay for someone to believe what they believe. And you don't have to agree with everyone. That's the beauty of being free will, is that you, Danny, can have a choice and an opinion, and I don't have to agree with you to accept you or love you. You let me believe what I believe, and I let you believe what you believe. Now, granted, am I always going to stand here and say that my way is right? Yeah, everybody does. Everyone. I don't care where you're standing, you're right. And so it's not about you choosing what's right or me choosing what's right. In my perspective, it's about us figuring out what is actually right from God's perspective. Our purpose is a lot of times defined by our design. And it's okay if this thing believes that it's a toaster. I don't have to agree with it, but I can still love and accept it. And it actually works well, even within our marriage. It's interesting is that we have this choice by comparison. And to be honest, we've tried this experiment for several years in our country. I personally think it's not working.